Hello and welcome to the channel. I'm Annie, this is Stanley, and we're here to talk about books. Today's episode is going to be the next in my Reviews Revisited series, in which I pick a book that I read a long time ago and don't remember very well or have quite strong feelings about one way or the other, reread it, and then compare my thoughts now to my original review. And today we're going to be talking about The One by John Marrs. Now, I don't really remember when I read this. It was a few years ago, definitely. I watched some of the TV show about 18 months ago, and I hadn't really remembered much about the book at that point, so I think it was a few years prior to that. I do remember that it is a science fiction book, but kind of near future, where someone's created an app which identifies your perfect match in the world, and everybody only has one, which creates a lot of ructions because there are people who are already in relationships. There are, people who discover that their match is to a different gender to what they would expect, that kind of thing. I remember quite enjoying it, but I don't remember a huge amount about it. I listened to the audiobook, and I think it's got multiple narrators because there's 5 or 6 maybe viewpoint characters. But yeah, don't remember a huge amount about it. I do remember things from the TV show, but I thought the TV show felt quite different to the book when I watched it. So it's all a bit of a jumble. And I guess we'll find out what happens. But before I go and start listening to the book for a second time, let's make some tea. Here we are once again at the tea drawers. 1. Black coconut, excellent. Got little tea bags in here to use up the last of my previous, so we don't need the filter tray. It's quite handy. There we go, straight in there. Black coconut, one of my favourites. Always welcome. Good old past me has already boiled the kettle, and we can see how full it's getting when there's a tea bag. Hurrah! Oh, I shall enjoy that. So I'm about halfway through The One by John Marrs, listening to the audiobook, and I'm largely enjoying it. I do have quite a few issues, which I'm going to get into, but it's compelling. The audio narrators are pretty good. We have 5 different point of view characters, and each of them has a different narrator. Some are better than others, but they're all perfectly fine. And yeah, the chapters are pretty short, perhaps a little bit too short in places, and they're quite cliffhangery, so you're always quite keen to get back to each one, but you never have to wait that long. But it is quite choppy, and because they're so short, you have to get to grips with all 5 of the characters and their situations and all of the peripheral characters in their stories pretty quickly in the first half hour, so it was a bit overwhelming perhaps. But yeah, it's entertaining, it's pacey, I am being drawn in by the stories, but I think for the most part, I mean, the central premise of having someone discovered this gene, which means that there's only one person in the world that fits you perfectly, is complete nonsense. But it's one of those books where you just have to kind of go with that and then see what happens. But I don't feel as if we're getting much in the way of how that would change the world, because it's been around for 10 years and there are references to and some discussions of various things that have happened along the way, but only on the scale of like individual stories. And people do talk about some scenarios which sound really fascinating, and there would be quite challenging matches. I would imagine they talk about people with lots of big age gaps and, other side of the world and that kind of thing. And yeah, the ones that are actually picked to focus on aren't, generally speaking, all that interesting. And a couple of them are very similar, at least to start off with. And it feels like the author kind of came up with a whole load of really interesting ideas about what might happen and what stories could be pursued, and then decided not to for some reason. And all of the 5 protagonists are under 40. They're all very attractive. They're all, I'm assuming, white. I have to say that not all of them are specified, but any of the characters who are specified in terms of racial background are white, and the others just aren't described at all. So there are 2 characters in one of the stories. So the friends of one of the protagonists, there are 2 friends who are presumably non-white because they're called Deepak and Samira, but that's it. And they're kind of terrible, so I don't really like them at all, so that kind of feels a bit weird. And they're all of the protagonists are able-bodied, they're all Western, they're all straight-ish. So yeah, it feels quite reductive in a lot of ways, and as if lots of opportunities have been missed. And there's also one chapter almost halfway through where 2 of the characters go into this very lengthy, in-depth discussion of how the whole thing works, the science behind it, various things that have happened, and trends in the way people are matched and how they feel about it, and the interactions that they have with their matches. And that kind of feels as if the author got halfway through and then put together a focus group and got a load of people to read the first half and then ask as many questions as they had about the setup, and then just wrote this scene to answer all of those questions in one go, which feels very, very clunky. So, but it is kind of working in terms of pulling me forwards, and a couple of the storylines are quite interesting, and a couple of them have become more interesting than they first appeared. But I would say maybe 3 out of the 5 just didn't really interest me that much to begin with, and they're only kind of getting to grips with more interesting aspects as the book goes on. So I think, that Mars has missed a trick in terms of making it much, much more diverse and much, much more interesting in terms of pushing the boundaries of what is possible with this scenario. And as I said, it's not as if he didn't think up other potential storylines, he just decided not to write them for some reason. But there you go. I am going to do a short spoiler section because there are a couple of things that I do want to comment on. A couple of them you do find out pretty early on, but I think going into it not really knowing much at all about who the characters are and what their stories are, if you do want to read the book, is probably better than having the information that you get quite early on. So spoilers for the first half of the one from now, and I will make it obvious when the spoilers are finished. So we have 5 protagonists, 3 women and 2 men, who get matched in various scenarios. The one that I'm most interested in is Christopher, because he's a serial killer, which I had completely forgotten. And yeah, I find him the most interesting because his match is a policewoman, a detective inspector. So that's quite amusing. And it also kind of makes sense because they have a similar level of intelligence around this kind of stuff, and similar aspects of, you know, wanting to understand things. Yeah, so I'm interested in that because I don't see how that can possibly end well. And Amy, Christopher's match, is actually my favourite character in the book, and her story cannot end in a positive manner because he has currently killed 12 people. So this is not going to end well. But I am most interested in that one. Obviously, it's the most shocking. There are a couple of scenes which are incredibly unpleasant. And even though it's less violent and less gory than the book that I'm reading physically at the moment for a different video, it was more shocking and more unsettling to me, partially because I was listening to it, and I think that has a bit more impact, and partially because that aspect of it is so different to the rest of the book that it really took me by surprise. Whereas the other book that I'm reading, it's kind of like pretty much all gore all the time, and so it kind of fits more with the story, and I've kind of got used to it now. But anyway, the women I'm disappointed in, because all of them have a focus on what they eat, what they weigh, what they look like. And I guess that is still a large part of the society that we live in today, sadly. And this was, I think, 10 years ago, roughly. So it would have been even more so then. But it just, I don't know, it does feel a bit reductive having all of them be concerned about that. And as I said, all of the characters are young and attractive, which is a bit disappointing because there's lots of interesting things you could mine with physical attractiveness or not, disability, that kind of thing. Anyway, and the similarities are that Mandy's match has died very shortly before she discovered who he was. And Jade, when she travels to Australia to meet her match, he has a terminal illness, so he's going to die quite quickly. So that feels as though out of the millions of different permutations you could have, why have two that are so similar? I mean, they do diverge because Mandy's story progresses in that her match's mother says that her match Richard froze some of his sperm because he had testicular cancer when he was younger. And the mother wants Mandy to bear his child. And then Jade's story diverges because she falls in love with her match's brother instead of him. So they're definitely going in different directions, and I'm much more interested in them now. Ellie, the other woman in the story, does have an interesting storyline because it turns out that she is the scientist who discovered the matching gene and created the app and the company and is now a billionaire. And so there are interesting repercussions for that and her match. But you don't find that out until nearly halfway. And up until that point, her story just wasn't really interesting at all compared to the others. And there was no real sense that there was anything going to really happen that was exciting, or there was going to be a big reveal. So that felt like a bit of a missed opportunity, and hers was a bit of a damp squib up until nearly the halfway point. So yeah, I have quite a lot of issues. I do. But I am interested to see where they go. I don't really remember, because the most recent experience I have had with this show was, I want to say, maybe summer 2024, when I watched most of the TV series. And whilst the concept of the matching app where you find your one true love is the same, the entire storyline completely diverges. The CEO of the company who supposedly discovered the gene turns out to be a murderer who is defrauding the public because she has publicised her husband as being her match, and he's actually not. He's a paid actor, and her match lives somewhere completely different. And she was not the one who made the discovery, and she murdered the person who did. So that's very, very different. There's no serial killer, so we've got that murder mystery instead. I don't remember. Oh, there's the policewoman falls in love with, no, is matched with another woman, which is unexpected by her. And when her match comes to meet her, there's an accident and then she's in a coma, and it turns out that she's already married and didn't tell the policewoman. So that's completely different. And the engaged couple, instead of the woman forcing the man to get the test done to see whether they are each other's match, in the TV show, the woman in the couple is the point of view character, and she steals her husband's DNA and sends off to get the details of his match and doesn't tell him. So it's all still terrible. Sally, who is Nick's fiance and insists that they get the test done, despite the fact that it must be wildly unlikely that it's going to work out in her favour. He is actually matched with a man, and he is straight, and so is the man that he's matched with. I didn't feel like the queer aspects of this have been handled very well in the first half, because she, when she finds out, thinks it's hilarious. And lots of people make jokes about it. His terrible friend Deepak makes jokes about it. And that's quite interesting in terms of, I'm not sure where that's going to go either. And it is an interesting idea that they're not physically attracted to each other, but they feel a very deep emotional connection. But as I say, the only very slightly queer representation, which isn't really at all because they're both straight, isn't being handled well. So that's disappointing. Yeah, and the first non-British person is Australian. And the second non-British person who was introduced is from New Zealand. And again, there really ought to be much more interesting diversity that you could include than that, I would have thought. Anyway, that's the end of the spoilers for the first half. Spoilers are finished. And I have thought about another couple of things. So yeah, there's not as much diversity in terms of where people are from as I might have hoped, and the idea that person that you're matched with would be in the same country as you, and even in several of the cases the same city as you in England, is so preposterous. In the long conversation that two of the characters have about the ins and outs of everything, there are some stats which say that 68% of people find their match is in the same country, and there's a scientific reason for that, or some theories about that. But even so, there's only 1 out of the 5 where the person isn't within an hour's drive of where they live, which I guess from the point of view of the story is quite handy, but it's just, the whole thing is just not really representative of the broad spectrum of diversity and different really interesting things that could have happened. So, but having said that, I'm not disliking, I'm not wanting to stop reading. I'm not wanting to speed it up just to find out what happens, which is good, because my one New Year's resolution for 2026 was to only listen to media on 1x speed. And that hasn't been challenged yet, which is good. So I am very happy to keep listening to it, but I am disappointed that there are so many opportunities that seem to have been missed in terms of where this story could have gone. But anyway, we are where we are. So I'm going to go and listen to the rest of it, and I will come back later and let you know my final thoughts. So I am back after finishing The One by John Mars. And I have a lot to criticise it for. I mean, there's over 100 chapters in the book. So I worked out they were an average of 6.5 minutes long on the audiobook, which is hardly anything at all. So across the 5 stories, you get sort of 5 to 8 minutes at a time. And so sometimes it feels like nothing is happening because you can't have that much happen in that space of time. So they're not really progressing. And other times it kind of skips over several months and you get a big summary of what's happened, or just, a scene of what's happening inside someone's head over the course of a few minutes. So, but they are really short and punchy as well to a greater or lesser extent. So it does kind of like draw you on. There was another one of those scenes, like the focus group scene in the first half, where it was the same 2 characters actually, but at a point of quite high tension, suddenly started having a massive discussion about the societal crime, demographic relationship stats across the world that have resulted from 10 years of people being matched with their one. And it just felt really weird. It was like, oh, now we're going to discuss the global impact of this thing, which would have quite a big global impact. And again, a lot of really interesting things came out of that conversation of different types of stories that could have been told in this world, but just weren't for whatever reason. But it just felt a bit weird that they were having this confrontation and then suddenly they started discussing statistics for ages. Seemed like a bit of a weird way of bringing it in. For the most part, the stories did go in interesting directions, unexpected ones, some things that I did remember as it went along. One of them, though, I just didn't like at all. The main character in that one just made really bad decisions all the way through, and I didn't like them. And all of the other characters in that storyline, apart from one, who I think really deserved better than the end that they got, all of them apart from that one were just terrible people, and I just wasn't interested in them. So that was a bit of a shame. But because it was only 1/5 of the book, it was fine, because it was always only 5 or 6 minutes, and then we were back to one of the others for most of the book, so that was okay. What else did I want to say? The focus on weight and physical appearance, but only for the women, continued throughout, and I just found that a bit disappointing, particularly in the female perspective chapters. So that wasn't great. The drama, the thriller type drama and ridiculousness definitely ramped up across 3. I would say 3 of the stories got quite ridiculous by the end. But, it was fine. It was exciting. It was pulling me along. It did mean, though, that the drama levels across the 5 stories were quite uneven. So I did say at the start, which is not a spoiler, that one of the protagonists is a serial killer. So his storyline started quite ramped up and just got more so. And most of the others started fairly mundane, is probably the word, but that doesn't mean they weren't interesting. They were just like real kind of normal stories of relatively ordinary people. And a couple of them did ramp up to quite ridiculous heights by the end, but 2 of them didn't. They had some interesting twists and turns, and it was more to do with the way people react to things and minutiae of interpersonal relationships kind of thing. But it did mean that the levels of drama across the course of the book got wildly out of kilter by the end, which made it feel a bit more uneven, because the stories themselves, all 5 of the stories, stay completely separate. There's never any connection between them. So it's basically a bit more like 5 novellas that have been set in the same world and then chopped up and interwoven than it is a kind of whole story, as it were. So as I said, I have quite a lot to criticize, but I listened to 11 hours of this audiobook in 6 days, which is nearly 2 hours a day, because my one resolution in 2026 is to only listen to and watch media on one-time speed, not to speed things up anymore. So I did listen to 11 hours of this audiobook, and I didn't feel the desire to speed it up to get through it faster. So I was obviously enjoying it because I was definitely listening to my audiobook more than I would normally in a week. So I guess it did its job in entertaining me and keeping me interested. And I am going to give it 3.5 stars for that reason. So that's The One by John Mars. Thank you for watching. Please give this video a like if you liked it, and subscribe if you want more content of me and Stanley talking about books. And I will see you in another video very soon. Bye for now.